Welcome to the Epcotian Adventure,
a podcast where we'll talk about all things Disney,
including tips and tricks, festivals and favorites, and the very latest in news and reviews.
But we're still old enough to remember when we thought being told to have a magical day actually was magical.
This is episode 24, Speaking of Disney, an interview with Andy Apodaca from the Palm Springs Linguist about the language of Disney.
Or, when you're a CM at MK, you can ER from your shift at POTC, but probably not if you're just a CP.
So now, please remain seated, keeping your hands, arms, feet, and legs inside the podcast as we embark on our Epcotian adventure. Howdy, folks. This is episode 24 of the Epcotian Adventure. Welcome, I'm Rod.
And I'm Sue.
And today we're talking to Andy Apodaca, a good friend of ours who you've heard us thank many times over the years. He is with the Palm Springs Linguist vlog and is an actual linguist and ex-cast member from Disneyland that I got to work with way back when.
Yeah, and Disney really does have its own language. They love to have nicknames and acronyms and term I just learned from Andy, initialisms.
Initialisms, yeah. Like when you're working for Disney, you could be a CP, which is
college program.
And then CT is the next step up, which is
casual temporary.
Right. And then CR,
casual regular.
Casual regular could be weekends and Fridays and holidays. And then B, which is
B.
That's you're not Aunt B from Mayberry. You're actually part-time, or A, which is full-time.
Yeah, and those are just sort of secret little cast member status codes.
Yeah, they're like employment status is a great way to put that. But another really common one that we use all the time, WDW.
Yeah, that's one that most people are familiar with, and it simply stands for Walt Disney World. But what you might not know is the story behind why it's WDW for Walt Disney World. You may have noticed that Disneyland is simply Disneyland. It's not Walt Disneyland. And the reason behind that is that Walt actually built Disneyland. He was a part of it. So when he passed away in 1966, Magic Kingdom was still being built. And his brother Roy took over that process. So Roy wanted to make sure that Walt was honored in the process. And he insisted that that first W be put on the initials so that it was always Walt Disney World, so that we always had a reference back to Walt.
Yeah, that's in keeping with like Walt Disney's Carousel of Progress or Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room at Disneyland. It really is a tribute to Walt and is, to this day, is really an amazing part of the language of Disney.
Love that.
So let's jump right in. Here's our interview with Andy Apodaca. So, Andy, welcome to the Epcotian Adventure.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We start all of our Speaking of Disney series interviews off with a standard set of questions, so we're going to head down that road here. So.
Okay, Bring it on.
Get to know you a little bit. So, Andy, go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us tell everyone how we are all connected.
Okay, very good. I'm Andy Apodaca, and I worked at Disneyland from 1986 to 1996. So Rod and I worked together on the west side, specifically on Splash Mountain and Pirates of the Caribbean, Haunted Mansion, and many of the other rides from the New Orleans Bear Country area, especially.
That was such good times back then. Oh.
Yeah. And Sue, I know that you worked at the park as well. And we had you on my YouTube channel, Palm Springs Linguist, when you kicked off this Epcotian adventure. So it was great to meet you as well. And all three of us share our love for Disney, all things Disney, especially the theme parks in Epcot.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. And I love that you still call it Bear Country.
Yeah. That just shows you how old both of us are, too.
I still awesome.
Call it an OB.
Yeah, I know all the new terms, but I don't use them.
I love that. So what is your personal history with Disney? What is your first Disney memory, and what did it mean to you, like as you were growing up?
My first Disney memory would be when I was a little kid. I grew up in the city of Orange, which is, of course, just one city away from Anaheim, where Disneyland is. And every year, my family loved Disneyland, and they would bring me on my birthday when I was a little kid. So every year I would go there once a year when I was a little kid. And so in the 70s, when I went there, I mean, I just loved it so much that I would bring home the free guide, and I would take it home, and I memorized it basically. It was up in my room. I got that Disneyland map that you could buy in the 70s and put it on my wall, and completely enamored by the place because it just, took me to a different world. And then starting in, once I became a teenager and I could go there on my own, then I became an annual pass holder, and I was a first generation annual pass holder in 1983 when they started the program.
Wow.
That's so cool.
In fact, at the time they sold, right now they just sell adults and children tickets, but at the time they had junior tickets.
I remember that. Yeah.
So I actually had a junior annual pass because I was in those teenage years between the two.
Was it a major price difference? Do you remember, like between the adults, or was it closer to the kids' rate? Or
it was. I don't remember the price of it, but I still have that junior annual pass, that little laminated card.
That is cool.
Yeah. So that's completely gone. That price difference. And then, I was going to the park all the time, and I actually didn't want to work at Disneyland because I kind of thought that it might spoil it for me because I spent so much time there, and it was, this was not just my hobby, this was my social life. My friends were there.
Oh, yeah.
But I broke down and I started to work there.
As everyone does.
Yeah.
You give in eventually.
Yeah. And, of course, that was a good move, because I met so many fantastic people there and got to enjoy it from a different side. And then kind of what happened is that, as I got my college degree, I started to study languages, and I'm still working at the park as a ride operator. And I'm like, oh, this is the perfect place for me to practice because, there's people from all over the world. I can try to speak Spanish to them. I can try to speak French to them. And then I went down a career path in education and linguistics and language. And then those two worlds have kind of met back again. On my YouTube channel, I did a video about Disney jargon. So at the time, I didn't want to do any videos other than just language and linguistics. But I'm like, oh, well, this is language and Disney. So this, really fits into the wheelhouse. And then ever since I started that video, I'm like, oh, I really have to do Disney videos on my channel as well. I love Disney too much.
It's hard not to. It's part of who we are. Once you've been a cast member, you always kind of feel that love for the parks.
Absolutely.
And you're right.
I still try to go to Disney World as much as I can, and Disneyland as well. But in a way, I almost feel like Disney World is easier, even though I live so close to Disneyland.
And you are totally right. Disney does have its own language, so that's kind of what we're going to talk about in a little bit. But that's a great point. So tell us a little bit about your background then. Like, how did you decide to become a linguist, and what does that even mean? What does it mean to be a linguist?
So a linguist is just simply somebody who studies languages. When I went back to school, I went to college briefly and I dropped out, and then I became a B at Disneyland, which means, sort of means full time. And I wasn't going to college. And then I went to Euro Disney at the time, Disneyland Paris now. I was there just prior to the opening, visiting someone, and I realized that, there's a whole other world out there that, I'm not going to get to see unless I put some effort into, my education so they can get a different kind of job. And I fell in love with the French language out there at Euro Disney. So then I came back and I took a French class, and then it just kind of snowballed from there. And eventually I got to the point that I was going to be a French major, and the only thing I had left to take was French literature classes. And I don't even like English literature. So I'm like, what am I going to do? I just didn't want to take those classes. So I switched. I looked to see, what major I could switch to where I could count those French classes, and linguistics was it. So I switched over to linguistics and, out of pure laziness, but it fascinated me. It completely fascinated me. It was the best move I've ever done. And then
I don't know that that's laziness. I think that was pretty ingenious. That's some ingenuity right there.
Well, at the time I was thinking that, what do you do with a degree in linguistics? It's like underwater basket weaving.
What do you do with the BA in English?
But little did I know that, I actually became a teacher so that I could speak a foreign language. So, I was a bilingual teacher and I could speak Spanish. And I didn't realize at the time, but linguistics actually helped me tremendously because, it's all about breaking down language. And that's what you have to do for kids when they're learning a language.
Yeah, that's really smart. That's very true. I didn't even learn those types of grammatical terms until I was taking a second language in high school. So
that's completely normal, because when we learn our first language, we're just learning how to speak. But when you learn your second language, that's really when you learn what language is all about.
That's so true.
Really good point. Yeah, I took Spanish in high school and college and still have a hard time ordering for myself a Taco Bell. So, yeah. It's funny. I could speak a little bit when we worked at the parks. I could direct people, to the bathrooms and tell them when the 3:00 parade was, things like that.
So a quick story. One time I was working on a submarine voyage and I was grouping people. And of course, what do we say when we're grouping? How many?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I asked this group, these two little kids, how many in your group? And they said, "I." And I didn't understand what they said. So, I repeated it and then they still said the same thing. I. And then finally I'm like, okay, they don't speak my language. And so really the only language at the time that I could reliably speak would be Spanish. So I tried and I turned to them and I said, ¿Cuántos hay en tu grupo? And they turned to each other and they said, "Nobody understands us here." It turns out they were Australian, and they were trying to say there were 8 in their group.
Oh my gosh!
Oh my gosh!
But I just had no clue.
Oh, that's great!
I love that story. That's great. Oh my heavens!
Oh goodness! All right. So while we're talking about language, you want to just jump into our
your videos, by the way, folks, if you're listening to this, make sure and go to YouTube and look up the Palm Springs Linguist. Andy has some fantastic videos on Disney jargon, and we're actually kind of piggybacking off that today.
Yeah, we're gonna touch on some terms, but on the videos that Andy's done, they're more of a deep dive. There's a lot more terms than we're gonna discuss today. So
yeah, I mean,
but this will be fun.
Yeah, in keeping with the Epcotian adventure, and what we're going to talk about is the language of Disney. Andy, what is the difference between jargon and lingo, or are those the same thing?
Well, they're practically the same thing. They're very much synonymous. There's just subtle differences between the two. Like, lingo is a more informal term. Jargon is a more formal term. Jargon also has a little bit more of a connotation that you're trying to exclude people.
Oh,
interesting.
And that can be very much on purpose, and that's not always a bad thing. I mean, sometimes that can be a bad thing. But, think about like at Disneyland, when we would have to say to each other, and we might say it in front of guests, "Oh, there's a code, we can't load the Star Tours cabin. There's a code V."
Right.
Right.
And you don't want to explain what that is to the guest. Yeah.
Yeah, you're trying to exclude the guests on purpose. You don't want them to understand what that means.
That's a really good point. I'd never thought of it that way. That's a really good point.
It's also, and just by the way, code V what does code V stand for?
That would be somebody threw up. That would be V for vomit.
So you can see why we don't want. To say that in front of guests because we're going to pick it up and it's going to be spick and span.
And going with that, there's also a code H for either horse or human, and you can figure that one out.
Yeah.
And code U, which is the other side of that. So we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Let your imagination run wild. Also, jargon is just a little bit more of a technical term than lingo. But both jargon and lingo, it's specific language used by a specific group of people for a specific purpose. So obviously with, the jargon or the lingo of Disney, we're talking about some things with more specificity, and we're also talking about things where we're framing it in a certain way.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, like some basic acronyms that are used throughout the Disney parks would be like WDW for Walt Disney World, and DLR for Disneyland Resort, and DHS, Disney Hollywood Studios, DAC, Disney Animal Kingdom.
Yeah, Disney has a particular love for acronyms, I think.
Yes.
Literally every ride, every land, every restaurant, every single thing that you could possibly mention has an acronym.
So, Andy, is an acronym a form of jargon?
Not necessarily. And so, one of the videos I did that was showcased Epcot Center, or Epcot, was about the differences between initialisms and acronyms. And acronyms are words that have each letter stands for something, but you say it as a word.
Oh, like scuba.
Exactly. Because that stands for self-contained underwater breathing apparatus, but we don't say SCUBA.
Right.
We say scuba.
Interesting. So Epcot would be an acronym and WDW would be an initialism.
Exactly.
Oh.
Yeah, it's funny. I've heard Epcot referred to as the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. And Walt even referred to it one time as the experimental prototype city of tomorrow.
Yes.
But it's funny, cast members refer to it as every paycheck comes on Thursday. And some guests refer to it as every person comes out tired.
Yes.
And they're all accurate.
Those are all accurate, yeah.
I'm going on a trip with my sister, and she's going to see Epcot for the first time in December.
Oh.
And I've already told her, you start walking.
Start wearing in whatever shoes you're going to wear. Don't bring
That's right.
Yeah, if I go on a cruise, I gain 10 pounds. If I go to Epcot, I lose 10 pounds, even though that I eat the same amount of food in the same amount of time.
It is amazing.
Yes.
Some other ones that you hear referred to all the time that are Disney specific, and it's because Walt considered Disneyland a show. The people that go to the parks are not
patrons or customers or any
customers.
of those. Yeah.
They were referred to as a guest, and everything that you can see as a guest is on stage. Everything that the cast member, which is the employees, see backstage is backstage. So everything behind the scenes is considered backstage. And cast members wear a costume. They don't wear a uniform, things of that nature. And when we were there, we all played a role in the Disney show. Basically.
Even the hiring process, they call it casting instead of hiring, which leads into another one of your videos, which we actually just watched this week, which was a lot of the roles initially were gender specific. And I don't think people going today even realize that. So
yes,
I think that that's super interesting. Did you want to talk a little bit about some of those?
Sure. When I first started working at Disneyland, and, I hired in 1986. So, there was still a fair amount of people that worked there from the 60s and the 60s and the 70s. And, they hadn't left yet. So when I work on the rides on the attractions, catching myself here. It's been a long time, but it's still in there. I would always try to talk to the old timers and, find out, what it was like in the old days at Disneyland. And I was shocked at how many of the attractions, even then, were specifically all male crews or all female crews. And some of them, were pretty logical because they were based on theming. Like, for example, the Disneyland Railroad, that was themed. Or here, let's take Mark Twain Steamboat. The Mark Twain Steamboat, only guys worked it at the time. And the intent of that was to put on the show to really take you back, to the 1800s, the time of Frontierland. And usually men would be the ones that were doing those jobs.
Right. I remember you saying something along the same lines on the Main Street vehicles.
Exactly. That was true of a lot of the attractions that were all male. Some of the attractions that were all female, Storybook Land Canal boats, but that one actually switched back and forth. That actually started off as all men, because when the park first opened, it wasn't called Storybook Land Canal boats. It was the Canal Boats of the World. And actually, I guess it was one of the attractions that it technically opened, but they really hadn't finished it. Like the boat system, the ride vehicle system was there. At the time, the intent was to have little miniatures of different world landmarks. I'm not sure which ones they were going to do, but, like the Leaning Tower of Pisa or the Sphinx from Egypt and things like that. But they never did do that. And so at the time, the idea is that it was an all-male crew because they were supposed to be kind of like gondoliers.
Oh,
that makes sense.
But then shortly thereafter, they switched the theme and they actually put in theming with all the little houses, all the miniatures from the storybooks, all the stories. And it was still all guys because of tradition, because it was already, it was previously an all-male attraction, but they soon switched it over to all females. And then it wasn't until the mid-90s that guys got back on the ride.
And that was back
one
when,
example.
In the 90s or in the early 80s or late 80s or early 90s was when that was happening all over the park, right?
So specifically, it was in 1995.
Oh.
That happened. Now, there's a few isolated attractions, like, for instance, Jets or Mars. I always get confused between the two of those because they were in the same rotation when I worked there. But Mission to Mars or Rocket Jets at one point in time was all female, and I believe it was in the mid-70s switched to being co-ed. There was examples of that happened in the park where it switched, but there were few and far between. And it was really in 1995, when our friend Sioux went into the office and
Sue
said,
Barnaby.
Yeah.
Good old Sue B.
Yeah. But yeah, Suzanne Barnaby, she was a ride operator with Rod and I, and she was also a friend. And she went on a trip to Walt Disney World, and she saw at Walt Disney World, they had women working on the Jungle Cruise. And she went back to California and went to the supervisors and said, well, why don't we have this? And they basically agreed with her that they should. And they trained Sue Barnaby and Joy. And they were the first two women. Technically, they weren't the first two women because there actually were women in the 70s briefly and the early to mid 80s briefly, but that didn't stick. But when Joy and Sue got trained on the ride, it stuck. It's been co-ed ever since, but it started a domino effect across the entire park. The rest of that year, women were being trained on rides that only guys worked and vice versa.
I love that. It's so interesting when you start looking at things like that and suddenly someone asks the question and you realize there isn't an answer. It's like, well, I don't know. That's just how it's always been.
When I got trained at Country Bear Jamboree, they didn't have a male costume. They literally put me in the buckskin pants from the canoes and a shirt from merch for Critter Country for the first few weeks.
Oh, wow.
That is so cool that you guys, that not only that they have integrated the roles into whoever best fits the role, but that you guys are both there at that time. That's really neat that you got to be a part of that.
That really was the heart of the change, because there was lots of changes over the years, but it was just a single location at a time. But really, like I said, in 1995, it all changed.
It is interesting because, Indy didn't open as an all-male attraction. It opened integrated, really, for male and female. And at certain attractions like Jungle, it sounds like it might be a male role, but when you see the current movie that just came out and a powerful woman being able to be a role model in that film, it screams that Jungle should have had male and female years ago.
Yes.
And things like tiki.
And they did try.
Tiki wasn't 100% female because I loved working tiki.
Yeah.
Even though Jose calls you senorita.
I know. What's with that? Jose, I'm not a senorita. Oh.
I think that Carousel Progress and, for its brief run at Disneyland, and I believe Tiki Room was like this as well. At one point in time, it was all female, except it was a male lead.
Oh, how odd.
Oh, wow.
And there's another good term to explain. A lead within the Disney roles is a foreman or somebody in charge of the attractions.
Yeah, that's a good one to throw in there for sure.
And if we're talking about attractions, there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens behind the scenes that you don't hear if you're a guest. And we already mentioned a few of those, code V, code H, code U, but you also hear terms bantered around like ODV, which is outdoor vending.
Which are all the carts, like churro carts, and what else do they sell besides churros? Because those are the best ones.
Ice cream, or at Walt Disney World, it would be the turkey
popcorn.
legs and popcorn, yeah.
I was in outdoor vending, ODV for about a year and a half before I transferred to attractions.
What was it like working ODV versus attractions? Did you enjoy one over the other?
Well, I definitely prefer attractions. I remember a supervisor came up to me when he found out that I wanted to transfer, and he had come from attractions before he went into supervision, and he was trying to talk me out of it. And he was saying, it's really kind of boring and repetitious. and I just kind of laughed at it because it's like, yeah, and you think me, selling ice cream all day long is not repetitious?
Boy, that's the truth.
Okay, so if you're working at a cart and you're there all day, there's times where it can be boring. I always had a love for the West Side, so I would always request, like if I had an ice cream shift, oh, please put me on the West Side, on an ice cream cart on the West Side. And, it was actually kind of peaceful because you're in, a beautiful area with beautiful architecture with all the trees and the river. And I loved all that.
Yeah. West Side for Disneyland would be Adventureland, Frontierland, New Orleans, Critter Country, once known as Bear Country.
Okay, so this is really kind of pathetic of me. But whenever I'm trying to figure out which direction is north, south, east, or west, no matter where I am, I don't do it based on the sun like normal people. I think to myself, well, where's the castle in relation to where I'm at?
No, I understand that completely. Yeah, I feel you on that one.
That's funny. I've always had trouble with those cardinal directions. Maybe I'll start using that trick. Maybe that'll help me out.
I'm amazed. I can be like in San Diego and I can still use the castle as a reference. Like you have to get me really, really far from Disneyland before that doesn't work.
It can also work against you though. When we went to Tokyo Disneyland, we were familiar with the layouts for Disneyland and for Magic Kingdom, and the other Disney parks, but specifically the castle parks. And we rode the Haunted Mansion. Well, the Haunted Mansion at Tokyo Disneyland is in Fantasyland, but the outside and the inside feel very much Magic Kingdom. They're that same looking building. So we went into Haunted Mansion and rode through, and your mind starts to play games with you. And it's like everything looks familiar. So, hey, all of a sudden, when I walk out of the building, I should be in Liberty Square looking at the river. And you walk out right into Dumbo. And you want to talk about a mind freak. It just, your mind, not only can you not tell what direction you're facing, it's like, I don't even know what country I'm in anymore.
I find Haunted Mansion really interesting attraction in that it seems to be in a different land in every single park.
It actually is. It's the one attraction that is in a different land in every park. In Disneyland Paris, it's in Frontierland as Phantom Manor. A lot of people consider Mystic Manor part of the Haunted Mansion family as well in Hong Kong Disneyland, at which it's in Mystic Point.
Okay, so when are we going to get that in Animal Kingdom?
Right?
Yes, actually, we just talked about that in a previous episode, in a Blue Sky episode we did called Disney Are You Listening? The Attractions Edition. And Mystic Manor is one of those ones that would fit. I suggested it be put into a Frontierland facade and put Beyond Thunder and part of the SEA tour that we devised. And so you can do Jungle and Thunder and Mystic Manor.
Love that.
as part of and being hosted by a guide from SEA. But yeah, I would love to see that even take the place of Dino or something.
I would like anything to take the place of Dino.
There's actually, looking back at attractions, Dino is a really good one. Dino is how you would see it listed on your schedule. A lot of the attractions, or all of the attractions, were abbreviated back on our schedules. And you would see for Pirates, it would say Pirate HH for hostess, or Pirate TR for trainer, or LD for lead. And CTX was the original name of Dino. It was Countdown to Extinction, and they abbreviated it CTX before it became Dino, or Dinosaur.
And it's one thing if for the cast members to deal with all of the acronyms and initialisms, but I feel that a guest actually has to learn some to really be able to navigate the parks now.
That is very true. And there are a lot of those initialisms, which I'm just now learning. Thank you very much. Which are guest facing, that are intended to be sort of to let them behind the curtain a little bit.
Yeah, the most common one, probably like DVC, is probably the most common one you hear, Disney Vacation Club, the timeshare element of Disney. But you will hear other ones. Another real common one is the DAS pass, the DAS pass. I don't know what that stands for. Disabled
Disability Assistance Service.
There we go. Perfect. Yeah, that's actually, we're going to be doing an episode specific to the DAS pass here in a little bit, and interviewing some folks that deal with that on a daily basis when they go to the parks.
Oh, very good.
But yeah, that's the pass that anybody who has any kind of a different ability that needs extra assistance, whether you're in a wheelchair or a scooter, or you just have a child with autism.
The other ones that guests see all the time, now they're seeing LL and ILL because it's the lightning lane and individual lightning lane that you have to know how to navigate the whole Genie Plus system.
Yeah, and the signs even say LL on them now.
Well, and DDP now that the Disney Dining Plan is coming back, you'll see DP on all the menus and all the everything. And it really does kind of feel like a way to include the guests in some of that jargon, like wink, wink. We all know what this means. You're part of the club.
Well, and then behind the scenes, you might hear as a guest something such as the attraction codes. And it's funny, they've differed over the years. At Disneyland, if an attraction was going to be delayed opening, it was considered code 100. But a common one that you hear, and you'll even hear guests use this all the time, is the attraction is 101. In the past, that meant, oh, hey, I'm going to be driving down US 101. Yay! 101 at Disney parks means the attraction has broken down or is closed for some reason. Right. And then that's where the split happens. When you and I were doing it, it was 101 and 104 for up and down. And then there was a 102 and 103 for down for emergency, or down for urgent 102 and down for emergency 103. And I actually called an attraction 102 one time due to a guest injury where we needed CFA. I was the lead at Mansion, and somebody fell out of the vehicle or stepped out of the vehicle wrong at unload and broke their ankle. And so we actually called the attraction 102. Do you ever recall calling an attraction anything other than 101?
That 101 was the only term that I ever used when I would call Central Communications to alert them that our attraction was closed. And then of course there was a different number for when it was back up and running.
Yeah, 104, 105, and 106 actually. 105 was up diminished capacity, so lower capacity. 106 meant up full capacity.
So did those change over time?
Well, no, they were different. When I went to Magic Kingdom and worked, 101 and 102 were the only terms. It was 100 for delayed, 101 for down, and 102 meant it was back up and operating. So the whole other end of that spectrum didn't even really exist.
Oh, so they added more detail.
They added more detail at Disneyland.
Got it.
Fox units, another good one for security, or Pluto units. Fox unit would be an undercover cast member for security. A Fox unit you would have walking around during...
Like plain clothes.
Like plain clothes, yeah. That's a great way. Pluto units were the dog units, and Alice units in Anaheim were the Anaheim PD.
When I was reading about Alice unit, that was actually brand new to me. I had never heard that term before. And was there a different term for when you would have, I remember working on Space Mountain, and somebody approached me and they asked me a question like, I don't know, where is the restroom or something like that. And I remember thinking to myself that I know you work here. I know you know the answer to this. And it was, somebody undercover that was doing like a rating. So that happened to me a couple times on Space Mountain, because I also remember one time that a supervisor told me that, first of all, Space Mountain, especially back then, was very, very loud. The noises in there were really, really loud. And I was working, we called the position bars. So that was the position that the cast member that would check to see that you had your lap bar down. And we had to tell everybody that, hold on to your hats, hold on to your glasses if they were wearing any of those things. And the supervisor once told me that somebody was undercover, doing a rating, and I had told them to hold on to their hat, but I wasn't, I forgot if they said I wasn't very nice about it, or if I yelled at them. The supervisor just kind of laughed with me about it and said, "Don't worry about that, Andy. Like, the guest is not going to hear you unless you yell."
Yeah, I was working rear unload at Pirates, which would be of the two boats at Pirates when you get off the boat, the rear boat. And I looked down the flume, and coming around the corner, a child had his head out of the boat. And it stayed out of the boat as it's approaching the dock. So I hit a station stop, which is a button you would press as a cast member to stop the progress through the station. And I walked over and I had to yell at the child and say, "Please keep your head in the boat." And the father got off the ride and yelled at me, "How dare you yell at my child?" And I walked over, I said, "Sir, follow me over here, please." And I pointed the gap between the dock and the boat. And I said, "Do you think your child's head would have fit into that space?" "Well, no." "Do you see how far back the boat is coming in right now?" "Yes." "If I said it at the level I'm saying it now, do you think they would hear me?" "Oh, well, no." He goes, "Well, you could have said it nicer." I was smiling when I said it.
Yeah. As I'm sure I was to that guy that was holding onto your hat.
Yeah, we used to have a term for that, and it was, we would call it a treasured guest.
Yeah.
A lot of times if you're a guest and you hear a cast member say, "and have a magical day," that's the equivalent of you getting the middle finger from that cast member. So just so you know, if you ever become a treasured guest at Disney, you're going to have a magical day.
That's the ultimate term as far as trying to frame something in a positive light, that it just makes me laugh.
Yeah. There was a term that we heard on one of your videos that I was both Sue and I were unfamiliar with. And Sue,
which one?
You wrote that down. What is that one?
It was the Kevin's party. What is the story there?
Okay. So that didn't start in attractions or foods, which is why that would be new for you. It was new for me as well. A close friend of mine worked in Disney Vacation Club and explained to me that had become a term that started in Disney Vacation Club, and then it started to spread out of DVC. And there was a guy that obviously was named Kevin, and he would leave his position and basically would be, fooling around, either talking to people in a way that he wasn't supposed to, like maybe talking to other cast members, or just wasting time before getting back to his position. And people started to joke that, "Oh, well, where's Kevin? Oh, he's at Kevin's party." His party was, getting away from his position. So it started to become a term that they used more and more and more. And it turns out they would even use that term in meetings. So,
oh, wow.
So, the leads within DVC would start to use it as well. So it kind of reminds me of back in our day, or back in my day, especially, because I know you worked there longer in different forms. One of the ways that we would get off the ride early was we would take the lost and found throughout the day, guests might lose a hat or some sunglasses or something like that. And, there's a central place in the park for lost and found, but somebody has to walk it there. So, I would always volunteer to walk it there so that rather than leaving my the ride 15 minutes before the end of my shift, which was the normal time to, go to wardrobe and, change your clothes, change your costume.
Yeah, what we would call walk time.
Yeah, exactly. Walk time. I would be able to extend my walk time because I would take Lost and Found at way too early and walk around the park and talk with my friends and get to Harbor House, which is the place we used to clock out, super early so I can chat with my friends. So we didn't have the term back then, but they could have easily said I was at Kevin's party there.
That brings up another good term. Harbor Point is the new version of Harbor House. And when all of us actually were cast members, we'd actually go in and clock in at what was called Harbor House, which was right off of Harbor Boulevard in Anaheim. And that's where all of the cast members that were hourly basically would go into the park, clock in through an actual time card system, and then go put their costume on and go do their role. That's going back a long time. Now cast members come in through several different gates at Disneyland and always have different gates at Magic Kingdom. The main entrance, of course, for most everybody was through the Utilidor entrance behind Fantasyland, right next to the Small World area. So the Utilidors at Magic Kingdom are they're called tunnels, but in reality, Magic Kingdom is built on the second floor. They dredged out the lake in front of it and put it up on what was just swampland, built a structure, an entire, what looks almost like a parking garage network of tunnels or just building, and then built Magic Kingdom one floor up. So when you walk into the Magic Kingdom, you're actually on the second floor.
And while we're talking about that, utilidor is another one of those Disney terms. That would be, I believe you would call that a portmanteau word.
Yes.
So
a portmanteau, right. So it's combining two words. So which two words is it combining?
So utility and corridor, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Hey.
Another example of that would be Imagineering.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, WDI has its own set of terms that have been out there for years. A lot of people probably have heard and maybe not have heard. Blue sky is a very common one that we use, which is to literally just imagine an attraction or an event or something.
As in the sky's the limit.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
WDI itself, Walt Disney Imagineering, originally was called WED for Walter Elias Disney, and its construction and engineering department was called MAPO, or Mary Poppins. And it's sad, Mary Poppins still does not have an attraction. I'll just mention that.
But yeah, Imagineering, we do take for granted as just being its own word, but that is another Disney created term.
Yeah, it's in the general lexicon out there now too. It's part of the American lexicon, really.
Yeah.
Imagineering is not thought of wholly as Disney anymore. I see it used.
I think another example of that would be e-ticket.
Yeah,
yes.
I think that's a very good point. Yeah, when tickets were a thing.
Yeah, and what I find interesting about, saying that something is an e-ticket is that if you actually remember back to when we had tickets at Disneyland, they didn't actually call them tickets. They called them coupons.
That's right. I do remember that.
But yet that's not how people remember it. Everybody, refers to it as an e-ticket attraction. It's not an e-coupon attraction.
That would just sound weird.
Yeah.
Right.
Little fun fact is Walt Disney and Walter Knott were actually friends back then because they had basically rival but also complementary theme parks. And when Knott's Berry Farm added tickets for Fiesta Village and then the Roaring Twenties, the highest ticket at Knott's was an A ticket. It was the opposite of the Disneyland ticket. So the corkscrew and the log ride there were an A ticket, not whatever their lowest one was. It went completely the opposite for e-tickets, but yet everybody remembers e-tickets from Disney.
And don't you think in a way, if we didn't have all this experience with Disney and we were able to take a step back, the Knott's version of the A ticket attraction being the highest quality or the biggest draw, that seems a little more intuitive because
It
it
does.
reminds us of like grading systems. Like, if you take a math class, you want to get an A.
Right.
Exactly.
Or you equate the A to the first letter being number 1. Like you want to be
Yes.
at the top of the scale. Yeah, that is interesting.
It's funny. There's a couple of terms as well that have dual meanings that we ran across. For one, the hub. The hub at Disneyland and Magic Kingdom and Epcot is the center of the park. So it's the area behind Spaceship Earth at Epcot, or it's the plaza in front of the castle at both Magic Kingdom and Disneyland. However, today the hub is also a computer web page or site that cast members use to pay themselves for days off. And a term that I had forgotten about and that you brought up was MALOA for like medical leave of absence, or for an ADO, which is an additional day off, or an ER, which is the second one that has two different terms. An early release from your shift would be called an ER. And so if you're ever on Jungle Cruise and you hear hear the skipper say, "This cruise was brought to you by the letters E and R and the number 1," that meant they wanted to go home. But at the Haunted Mansion at both Magic Kingdom and Disneyland, an ER is also the expanding room, which is the portrait room that goes with the at Disneyland, it's an elevator. At Magic Kingdom, the roof goes up, but it's, sorry, spoiler alert. But it has two different meanings. Kind of interesting. Do you know of any others that are like that?
Not off the top of my head. In fact, when you had listed some for me through a text beforehand, and when I saw hub and hub, I didn't get what the second one was. But then, as you were explaining the first one, the center of the park, it dawned on me. Oh, I know what he's about to say.
Right?
Yeah, and I didn't think about with ER as well. So, of course, I know those two terms, early release and expanding room, but it didn't dawn on me that was the same term. But you're absolutely right.
Well, and that second one is so specific.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could be in the ER asking to ER.
That is true. And I actually did the brought to you by ER and number 1 quite a few times working jungle when it was really hot outside or raining.
And if you got injured at Mansion, you could be asking to ER, so you could go to the ER while you're in the ER.
That's true.
That's funny. One of the terms you mentioned earlier was MALOA. And of course, that stands for medical leave of absence. But, you would see it on the schedules of, different cast members and what their schedule was that week. And if they were on a medical leave, it would say MALOA, which I'm sure probably never happens today because it wouldn't confidentiality.
Oh, yeah.
Very good point.
I would assume. But back in those days, it was very public. I always thought that MALOA sounded like a Hawaiian dance.
Something they do at the Alani now, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I want to go to MALOA. It sounds a lot more fun than to, go to Hawaii and dance than, be out for medical reasons.
Yeah, I mentioned Alani. That brings up other terms, too, that are in different languages. Even though Disney has its own language, there are other languages of the language of Disney. Alani is a good example. It's Hawaiian. If you go to, of course, Tokyo or Paris or China, they're going to also have their own local terms and local abbreviations for everything that we assume would be the ER for the Haunted Mansion, but yet they call it something completely different there to match their language.
That makes me super curious now. I want to know what they are.
I do. I want it because I helped write some of the training guides for Hong Kong Disneyland, and they got translated into Chinese and to Mandarin, I should say, after I completed them. And I always wanted to have them retranslated back to see what they look like. Never did.
So there's a fun story that I heard about the Enchanted Tiki Room in Tokyo Disneyland. And I haven't been able to verify this, but it makes a lot of sense to me that I guess, Wally Bogue, who was one of the voices in the Enchanted Tiki Room, and then he was also, one of the stars of the Golden Horseshoe Review, and he was a comedian, that my understanding of the story is that when they were trying to adapt it to the Japanese language for Tokyo Disneyland, that they had Wally Bogue, they had an interpreter, and then they had the Japanese writing team. And that, when Wally Bogue would talk about one of the jokes, or excuse me, when the interpreter would, mention some of the jokes, on the list of things to talk about, if both Wally Bogue and the Japanese crew, if they all laughed in their different languages, because the interpreter would say it in Japanese and say it in English, that those are the ones that made the cut.
Oh, that's great. That interpreter probably was Terry Fukuhara, who we worked with at Pirates back then. Do you remember Terry?
I do, yes. He worked extensively with translation for Tokyo Disneyland interpreting.
Yeah, OLC, another Disney one that's actually out there. It's Oriental Land Company. It's actually a non-Disney term. Oriental Land Company actually owns and operates Tokyo Disneyland and Tokyo Disney Sea separate from Disney.
Which I hate to say it, but isn't that part of the reason why it's so awesome?
Yeah.
They didn't really have a budget.
What do we call TDS for Tokyo Disney Sea and TDL for Tokyo Disneyland?
But yeah, they were able to build, because they're not Disney owned, they were able to build basically blue sky everything and just make it the best it could be, and it shows.
I
want their Winnie the Pooh ride. I want their Pooh Sunny Hunt.
Their poo,
it is so good.
Their poo is the poo. I mean, it is. It's trackless. You actually bounce with Tigger at one point, and like the entire room is bouncing. I still have never figured out the mechanics of that,
It's
and
so
I
cool.
absolutely love that version, because you see what took over what we used to call Bear Band, another cast member term for Country Bear Jamboree. Pooh went in there, and I was all excited. It's going to be great. And it's probably, of the 3 Pooh attractions, or the 4 actually now with Hong Kong, it's by far the least of the Pooh.
It's still adorable.
It is. It's very cute. But
Andy, we're about to get cut off here, so I just want to make sure that we wrap things up. And definitely thank you for your time. And it's been so amazing to have you on here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andy.
Oh, my pleasure. This is super fun.
And before we let you go, though, at the end of all of our interviews, we do a quick fire. So we're going to do that with you. Are you ready?
Bring it on.
All right. What is your favorite Disney movie?
Is Ratatouille Disney or is that Pixar? I guess it doesn't matter.
Pixar's fine.
Pixar will count.
I think Ratatouille.
Nice. Favorite Disney ride or attraction?
Oh, Pirates of the Caribbean, and specifically Pirates of the Caribbean in France.
Perfect.
Yes.
Yep. Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner. That's my favorite as well.
Who was your favorite Disney character?
Who was my favorite Disney character? This is such a stupid answer, but the first thing that comes to mind is Bill the Lizard, which is a ridiculous answer.
Oh, from Alice. Yeah. Poor Bill.
There goes Bill.
I love the fact that you both know who that is.
Oh, absolutely.
I can. I will. I love
Okay,
it.
so it's Bill the Lizard.
That's a great answer.
That's a great answer, yeah.
What is your favorite non-Disney park?
My favorite non-Disney park. Oh, Efteling.
Oh,
good answer.
Good answer.
Yeah,
wow.
that's on the list for us to go visit sometime in outside of Amsterdam, along with Toverland and what used to be Six Flags Holland is now Wallaby Holland.
We'll get
After
there.
you go to Efteling, we have to have a conversation. I would love to talk to you guys about Efteling.
That's a great idea.
I would love that. What is the best flavor of Dole Whip?
I actually haven't tried the other flavors of Dole Whip. I've only had the traditional pineapple. So
Man, you
have
got
to
to get
go
over
with that.
to Tropical Hideaway. Go try them all. They're all amazing.
Yeah, my favorite's the pineapple with the rum that you can get at several places in Florida. Captain Cook's at
That's a good
the
one.
Polly.
That sounds terrific. I've always kind of been more of like a mint julep guy. Like I love the mint juleps. And I was so when I finally found mint julep out, when I went to Club 33 for the very first time, it was for my 21st birthday. And of course, I saved my first legal drink for Club 33.
Oh,
wow.
That's
so
cool.
of course I'm like, I want my first legal drink to be a mint julep. And it's like, oh, it's not as good with the alcohol.
It's true. It's a whole different drink.
Yeah, until there was some plantation that we went to later in near New Orleans that had it where it was like Disneyland with the alcohol. And like, oh, this is awesome.
Would you rather rope drop or park close?
Oh, park close. I don't rope drop.
Good answer. Good answer.
And last one, what is your favorite Disney song?
My favorite Disney song. Oh gosh, there's so many. When I See an Elephant Fly.
Oh, good one.
Good one. I like
And,
that.
You know, I actually should add one to our quick fire. What is your favorite Disney park?
Oh, good idea. Yeah.
Which is my favorite Disney park? Gosh, that's hard to choose. I feel like during different time periods, I'd have different answers. Like if this was the early 90s, I think I'd probably say Epcot Center. Right now, I'd probably have to say, keep in mind, I haven't seen the Asian parks yet.
Right.
That's on my bucket list still. I'd have to say Disneyland Paris, their Magic Kingdom.
Yeah,
That's
amazing.
a great answer. Yeah.
Well, Andy, it's been a pleasure having you. For those of you listening, Andy is the host of the Palm Springs Linguist vlog, not podcast, even though I call it that all the time, but it's a vlog
on YouTube.
And you can see him. Andy, you're also available anywhere else besides YouTube?
You can find Palm Springs Linguist on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. But really, my main thing is to go to my YouTube channel, Palm Springs Linguist. That's really where I do everything, and you can connect with me.
All right. Thanks again. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Great. Thank you both.
All right.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Have fun.
Well, that was our interview with Andy Apodaca, joining us from the Palm Springs Linguist. He actually took time off of his vacation to join us on this, so thank you so much again, Andy. That is so great. Now, when we thank him at the end of every episode, you know why we're thanking him, because he's such a great guy. And you know what? This is our third interview. 2 of them were named Andy.
Oh my gosh, I
Isn't
hadn't
that
even thought
weird?
about that. That's right. People named Andy apparently are just very, very talented.
So if you're named Andy and you want to join us, give us a message.
Or if you're here in the Midwest and want some good frozen custard, find Andy's.
Hey, there you go.
Or Andy's Mints. Hey, look, there's a
I
whole
think
bunch.
that's a difference.
That's a different Andy. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, before we go, we'd like to thank our friend Andy again for sitting with us today from the Palm Springs Linguist, and another shout out also to Lynn and Ken at the Sweep Spot. You'll also hear us on the Sweep Spot podcast very shortly, as Sue and I sat with Lynn and Ken for an interview. Thank you again to them for their support and advice in getting this podcast up and running way back when. You'll also find both of those Disney vlogs on YouTube. A big thanks to our social media coordinator, Riley Piper, audio engineers Joey Humphrey and Paul Trett, and logo designer Evan Piper. Our theme music composer is Jason Patrick Rowan and is licensed to Pond 5. And of course, thank you, Phoenicians.
Thank you, Phoenicians. And don't forget to rate, review, like, and subscribe. It really does help folks find us. You can also find us on social media on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and wherever you listen to podcasts.
The Epcotian Adventure is a $1,000 brunch production. Thanks for joining us today for episode 24 of the Epcotian Adventure. I'm Rod,
And I'm Sue.
and we'll see you in line.
Bye.
After these messages, we'll be right back. Ba-boom.